Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about preparing your business for sale. And this video is largely dedicated towards entrepreneurs and business owners that are several months or years before thinking about selling their business and wanting to find areas where they can invest some time or money or effort into growing or improving that process to ultimately increase the exit value of the company. And so these are some very, very common areas that investors typically take advantage of when they buy a company and invest and grow it. So why not do it yourself so that you can sell your business at a higher valuation? So just as a background, my firm Robley Capital sells lower mid-market companies anywhere from about $1 million in revenues up to $100 million in revenues. And so these tips and tricks are applicable to lower mid-market businesses or mid-market companies that are $1 million in revenues and above. So, business owners can generate a tremendous amount of value by pursuing some of the items below in order to increase the attractiveness of the business to investors, while also avoiding some of the common negotiation pitfalls and downsides that investors take advantage of to undermine the value of that business. So, pre-sale preparation ideally should have a few years in advance, so anywhere from 1 to 3 years, to allow enough time for those changes to take advantage and to be reflected of in the financial statements of that company. So, looking at the list, there's a few cosmetic improvements that I'll be talking about, the financial statements, what to do with those, how to prepare the back office, how to manage your bad debts and your poor customer accounts, managing legal disputes and open disputes, employee planning and employee agreements, contracts with suppliers and customers, real estate considerations, whether it's you're leasing the property or owning the property, and as well what to do with cash and any outstanding loans on the balance sheet. So we'll talk about all these things in this video, and this is once again largely dedicated towards helping you make sure that you have the highest exit value when you go to sell your company in the open marketplace. So let's talk about appearance, the cosmetic improvements. So first impressions when meeting with investors and their lenders and the investors that are backing these buyers is critical to generating the buy-in necessary to get buyers excited about the opportunity and the upside that your business presents to them. Right? So you want to make sure that when they walk in and they do a site visit or they meet you and they look at that business, they say, wow, the core structure's there, it looks healthy, but there are areas of upside. So there are a few low-cost items that you can focus on to really help improve the appearance. The first and the easiest I always recommend sellers do is improve the website and the branding. If you have no logo, get a logo. And if you have a very old website or no website, you are missing out. It costs you $10,000 to put together a decent looking website, to show up on Google, to have your Google My Business account, to do all these things. And ultimately, the very first thing that a buyer does is when they receive your financial information or someone tells them that, hey, ABC Inc. is for sale, what do? They look you up online. So that first impression is critical. Now, some really, really hardened investors will see no website as a really good opportunity because it's like, wow, they got by this far with no website. But most junior or mid-level investors that are looking to buy maybe their first business, when there's no website, they're unable to generate a feel for that company or get excited about that company because they don't see anything online that lends some more information about your business. So putting together a website before you go to market is a really helpful way to improve and make sure that you have a good first impression. The second, and it's very, very easily understood, is having a clean facility is everything. So when investors will tour your business and they'll tour that facility and they're looking to buy it, one of the things that they're looking at is, can I envision myself in this company? And things like a dirty bathroom, dusty reception areas, messy lunchrooms, or poor outside landscaping, broken windows, leaky roofs, whatever the case is, it tempers and limits the investor's enthusiasm when they're trying to envision themselves in that business, because it's like, well, hold on a second. I'm not only buying this business, but I have to really invest in improving this facility, cleaning this place up. And there's all this dirtiness around here. Like I would assume employee morale must be bad, and it's just going to take a lot of work. So again, most investors, you want to make it easy for them to help them envision themselves in your business. So cleaning up your facility and spending a few $1,000s for some cleaning and janitorial services is critical, especially when investors are touring your facility. One of the things that I always look out for when I meet a new prospect, a new potential seller, is I will ask to go into the bathroom and look at the cleanliness of the bathroom. I've walked into some very dirty bathrooms, and obviously, it's almost like a proxy. I go back and I have a conversation with that prospect, and really the morale and the overall kind of outlook of that business is very reflective of the quality of the bathroom, unbelievably, in most instances, because if you're not going to take the time just to clean out that toilet bowl, you're most likely you don't really show up at the business, or you don't really care about the business, and that shows. And then one of the last things is dead inventory and equipment. Especially when a buyer is touring the facility, a key question is, do I have room to grow in the facility that the business is in today? And in most instances, I would say, 6, 7 times out of 10, when I sell a business, the owner is always like, oh yeah, there's another 5,000 square feet available. It's just that, there's a lot of old stock here. I'm just holding on to stock that customers have given me 10, 20 years ago, and I haven't thrown it out. And, oh, that piece of equipment, we never use it, so we could throw that thing out and free up some space. And they say all these things. So why don't you just do it? Clean that facility right now and get rid of all the dead inventory, and remove the concern that maybe investors have of, wow, I'm buying inventory that's probably not sellable. And B, get rid of all that equipment as well. Cleaning up and doing the cleaning up yourself, allows that investor to see, wow, there's a lot of space here. Either I can cut back on my leasing space, and that's seen as a savings, as a cost savings, so they'll pay you more, or they see that extra space as room for growth and they want to pay you more. So in both instances, it's a good thing. Now, looking at the quality of your financial statements, it's important to invest in upgrading your financial statements to eliminate the risk that buyers may have when it comes to pushing back on your EBITDA assumptions and disputing your purchase price. A lot of the times, investors will look at the quality of financial statements, and if they see that they're very poor, they will second guess the profitability numbers that you give them. So don't give them that chance. What you want to do is you want to invest a year or two before and upgrade your financial statements. Either A, hire an accountant if you don't have one. Make sure that you have an accountant preparing your financial statements and it's not just a QuickBooks, output. And B, you want to make sure that you hire an accountant that is A, qualified, and B, can prepare a review engagement statement. And what that means is that there are several levels of the quality of financials that you can get from an accountant. There's notice to reader, NTRs, review engagements, and then audits. For most mid-market businesses, an audit is not necessary. It's beating a dead horse. Like, it's way too quality intensive. But a notice to reader statement, there's no confirmation. There's no real sign off. It's just accumulating the information that you provide to the accountant. So the best middle ground, and this is usually required by banks when they want to lend to businesses as well, is a review engagement statement. So you need to upgrade your, number one, you need to upgrade your financial statements from notice to reader to review engagement. And the cost difference is immaterial usually. It's maybe $5,000 or $7,000 per year. But when NTR statements are simply compiled, there's no real verification, and so the buyer is going to question the value of business more. Whereas with review engagements, it provides a higher level of assurance that a CPA has looked at your transactions, has looked at your financials, and signed off on it. And it smooths out the transaction a lot more. I'll give you an example. We have certain businesses that go to market that have notice to reader statements, and as part of the process of selling their business, they go back to their accountant to get the review engagement statements at the end of the process. Well, what ends up happening is the accountant doesn't want to lose their business, because usually the buyer is going to move the accounting business somewhere else. So the accountant drags their feet, slows down the process, and ultimately probably delays the deal 1 to 2 months longer than it should. Whereas if you got the review engagement statements done up front, obviously you're just doing it for planning purposes. Your accountant doesn't know that you're in the market looking to sell. So they're just going to go through that process and prepare those statements. Doesn't slow down any deal, and it gets done up front. So that's number one. The second one is invest in tracking monthly financials. So most buyers will require interim monthly financial statements to get an updated view or on where the business is performing today, right? Your annual statements are not enough. They're good for historical analysis, but as they go through that process of buying your business, doing your due diligence, going to the bank to borrow money to finance that business purchase, at each stage in the process, people will be asking for your monthly interim financial statements. So make sure you have an accounting system like QuickBooks or WebEasy or whatever the case is that tracks those interim statements, and make sure that you keep a high quality view of those statements. You want to make sure that they're detailed, that they break down your cost, your COGS, your OPEX, your rent, and your monthly profit and revenues, so that you can accurately rely on those interim statements and provide those to the buyer and their bank. So that's really important. Unbelievably, some companies don't have that ability to generate monthly financials, or they're not accurate, or it takes a long time. So build the processes today to make sure that you can keep track of your monthly financials after every single month. And then lastly is track and count your inventory. Some businesses choose to avoid accurately showing the value of their inventory balance on their year-end statements to underreport the earnings of that business for tax purposes. Now, the simple rule is you want to invest in taxes. If you're going to go sell your business and you've been trying to underreport and hide your profit from the CRA or from the IRS for multiple years, that's good for you because it's saving you money in your pocket. But an investor, all that they have to look at is your financials. And there will be normalizations to those financials, which can be confirmed. But in most instances, you want to at least show some profit, some form of profit on the financial statements. And so one of the common areas where people manipulate that is by not tracking their inventory, especially in the small and lower mid-market space. So take the time when your accountant is preparing your review engagement statements, also ask for an inventory count, a detailed inventory count to break down the inventory that you carry on the balance sheet. You don't have to do it on a monthly basis. Sometimes, I know some people do it on a monthly basis, and that's good if you can do it. But some businesses, it's very difficult to track on a monthly basis. So at the bare minimum, you should have annual prepared inventory counts and breakdowns segmenting both your finished inventory and also your work in progress to allow a buyer, when they go through on due diligence, to understand what you actually own on the floor today. That's really important. Again, it just saves a ton of time in terms of disputes and pushback on your asking price. So the third area of focus is investing in your back office functions. So financial investors pay a premium for businesses that are well organized and have documented policies in place. And the reason why is because it reduces the buyer's transition risk and makes due diligence easier to complete. You always have to think about, when you're preparing your business for sale, how can I make this business easier for the buyer to buy and to transition into the company? If it's complex, if you're the sole person that knows all the processes and no one does anything else in that company, it's going to be really hard for the buyer to come in there and take over that company. And you know it. And if you know it, then you realize that it's very difficult to sell. So it's unbelievable. I'll talk to prospects and I'll say, I'll ask them the simple question: do you think that a buyer can come in and do what you do today? And when they answer honestly, a lot of the times the people that say no, I don't think they can, that business doesn't sell. And so it takes a lot more time and it takes a lot more work to delegate those tasks, to document those procedures. And so one of the common areas of focus for a financial investor in the early days is transitioning the back office. So investing in these back office procedures is critical to reducing the deal risk and avoiding, obviously, buyer concerns around, can I even transition this business? So what are some things to focus on? The first is tracking operational data. So buyers will require a detailed view of revenues and costs. So that goes back into the monthly financials. But keep track of your revenues and direct costs, not only at the top level, but focus on your product segments or your service segments, and track key operational data units. What you want to do, and maybe you don't care about this information, but the buyers care. And if you can provide this information, it makes life a lot easier in selling the business and doing due diligence, because a buyer is not only going to give you an offer, but then they're going to give you that offer and spend months in that company reviewing the financials and reviewing this information. If you can provide it to them, then you're going to speed up due diligence and move the deal faster to close. If you can't provide this information, either the buyer is going to walk away thinking, I don't know what I'm really buying, or they're going to try to go through this process, but it's going to take longer for them to get comfortable with the information that you can provide. So if you have a business, say for example, that has multiple divisions, you sell new equipment, you sell used equipment, and you do servicing for equipment. Keep track of each division. Keep track of the revenues from the new, from the used, and the service, and keep track of the direct costs associated with each division so that when a buyer asks, what's your gross margin for each division, you can accurately provide that information to them. And by generating that detailed information, I'll tell you, it will make life a lot easier for you and reduce your stress when you're trying to sell your business. Now, another thing is quoting modules for pricing. So quoting new work is a very, very common area that is centralized at the owner level, right? When you're quoting work, if you're a contractor, if you're, a developer, whatever the case is, pricing a job is a very critical function in the organization that is usually centralized at the owner level. The owner will do that. Or maybe an employee will do a little bit of the groundwork, but the owner will ultimately review and sign off on it. Well, if you can do this in advance, what I would recommend is you take 1 or 2 years before you sell your business to put together a model, put together an Excel model, put together something in your ERP system, and write down the processes in your thinking. What am I thinking of? How many hours are going into this? I'm breaking it based down on machine hourly rates. I'm breaking it down based on cost. I'm marking up my cost by X, by Y, whatever the case is, and start teaching the employees around you about how to think about pricing. And ideally, what you want to do is you want to take a VP or a manager or a production floor manager, whatever the case is, and together work on pricing new jobs out. And so when a buyer is going to ask you, who does the pricing? You can now say, I do it with a production manager. And so what that does is it provides a lot more comfort that someone else in the organization knows that function. And as well, you can then provide these processes, these documents, these Excel models that show how pricing works. And this, if you have this documented, is a key area that reduces a lot of buyer concern. Because one of the very common areas and mistakes that buyers make is they'll buy a business and the owner leaves too quickly and they don't know how to price work. And so they start making a lot of mistakes on pricing work and it blows out the profitability of the business, and then there's a ton of disputes. So to avoid that all, just educating how pricing is done at the company level requires documentation, models, and then training employees around you to share in that responsibility. And then the last thing is, say for example, you're a small company. So for most family businesses, the financial functions of that business are very, very weak. Usually the wife or the son or the sibling is going to be in that financial function role because most owners don't want to share how profitable the business is or share openly the financial performance of that company with a third-party employee. So they try to centralize the financial function of the business into a family member or related party's hands. And the challenge with that is that, usually they don't have a lot of experience to delegate or to systematize or to set up processes around the financial functions of that company. And there's no clear leadership. So one of the best things that you can do is, if you have the time and you have a little bit of resources, hire a part-time controller or a CFO that can professionalize alongside your family member who's in that CFO role, that function of the organization. Ultimately, that part-time CFO is not in your company, doesn't have a relationship with your employees. So it doesn't really, you don't need to worry about, sharing financials with your employees if that's your concern. But at the same time, they come in and lend an external point of view as to how can we improve this, upgrade our accounting system, start tracking monthly invoicing, maybe hire an internal bookkeeper, whatever the case is. Because funny enough, the most comfortable area for financial investors that are looking to buy your business is the financial area of the business. And they're going to be scrutinizing that area very quickly. Month one, when they step into the company, they'll most likely start looking at the bank accounts, looking at the AR and AP, tracking inventory, and all these functions that are usually centralized by that one family member. So having good processes in place, again, makes your business more desirable because the transition risk is reduced. So one of the fourth area that I want to focus on is bad debts. And so ongoing bad debts is an indicator of poor financial controls. And so one of the common things that I look at when I'm talking to a prospect is I'll ask for their financial statements and I'll look at their bad debt expense. Now, if there's a one big surge, $15,000 bad debt expense 1 year, but annually they usually average about $1,000, there's no real challenge there. But I've seen businesses where on an annual basis, bad debt is 100, 200, 150, 175, $150,000 in bad debts a year. And all of a sudden you're looking at that and saying, this is a $5 million revenue business, or a $7 million revenue business. And you have really 3, 4, 5% of your sales, which are bad debts. So the problem with that is that it lowers the true collectible sales value that a buyer is going to be pricing and valuing your business off of. And this ultimately negatively impacts the value of your business, because buyers are going to say, well, hold on a second, with all those bad debts, realistically, we're spending a lot of resources and time going after bad customers. And I don't want to be buying bad customers. I want to buy a good set of customers. So, really for you, you need to focus on reducing those bad debts in the last few years to clean up the historicals, to show to the buyer that, hey, we have good customers and we have good policy in place. So obviously the first step is to formalize a credit policy for AR. You want to understand, how much credit am I giving to first-time customers? How many purchases do those customers have to complete before I start giving them AR terms and extend credit? Do I run credit checks on an annual basis? Do I run credit checks on the upfront customer? Do I need to require deposits? Whatever the case is, trying to change your AR policy to reduce that bad debt is going to be the first step to manage this. And so what I would recommend is you reach out to your accountant, your annual accountant, hopefully someone that you've now hired to do your review engagements, and that person is also going to start giving you some advice, because they obviously understand the processes behind how to reduce bad debts. Now, the other thing is you want to manage your AR accounts and offer discounts, especially if you're in a business where, AR is extended for 100 days, 120, 130 days, because anything beyond 120 days overdue is usually considered a high-risk account that investors and the banks will just write off, and they'll say it's not collectible, even though it may be collectible in the future. So I see this challenge usually with contracting firms. It takes a lot of buyer education and bank education to tell them that, hey, that's our business. This is how we're run. We have holdbacks. We have certain AR accounts that will not be collected for several months. So the best thing to do is either obviously educate the buyer on that, or if you can, incentivize those customers to pay you back on a quicker basis, even though it may require you to give a 2% discount. And by reducing your AR extended terms from 120 to 60 days, again, it makes your business more attractive. I'll put myself in the buyer's shoes. If I was a buyer and I was looking at a business to buy, and it had consistently AR would run over 50 days, 60, 90, 120, and all of a sudden, I'm waiting literally 3-4 months to collect my money, I would have a serious concern around cash flow. How much cash do I need to finance the day-to-day operations of this business if I'm selling something and I'm waiting 3 months to actually collect the money on that sale? And so it makes your business a lot more unattractive. So you want to make sure that your AR is manageable and shorter. And then ultimately, there is a really good rule, which is majority of your 80% of your stress is going to come from probably about 20% of your bad customers. So increasing bad debts, communicate ultimately that there's some bad customers that you're dealing with. So focus on the customers that are paying you in slower time intervals. And obviously, if they're critical customers, then you have to change the terms, maybe give them discounts. But if they're non-critical customer or they're smaller accounts, fire those customers, get away from those relationships, and seek other customers to replace those accounts that are going to pay you more quickly. So legal suits and open disputes is something that will ultimately undermine the value of your business on day one. A buyer is going to assume the worst when they look at a legal dispute or, a lawsuit or a past lawsuit in the last 3 to 5 years. So when I usually talk to potential sellers, I always ask them, Do you have any current lawsuits? Yes, no. Have you had any lawsuits in the last few years? And ultimately, if you have, one of the things that you need to do is you need to quickly get a letter of release and solve that issue fast up front. Taking a business to market and trying to sell a business that has an active ongoing lawsuit is going to cause a ton of problems because buyers understand that they don't know everything behind the scenes. And some sellers just lie. That's the reality of the situation. So buyers can't be trusting of what the seller says. So they're going to assume the worst of that lawsuit. They're going to factor in legal costs. They're going to factor in delays and potential reputational risk. And all of these things, all of these concerns around maybe even what would be a small customer lawsuit are going to undermine the value of your business. So, it's really important to address these up front. So, one of the things that I see is, especially if it's a customer lawsuit, being sued by a customer is one of the quickest ways to lose buyer interest because it communicates you either have very poor customers that are going to be litigious and push back and are not afraid to push on you, or you are doing a bad job of handling those customers and therefore they may leave the moment that the business sells, or they're hanging on by a string today. So, customer disputes are one of the worst areas of a lawsuit when you're trying to sell a business because it threatens the very core value of the business because those customers are generating the money that, obviously is creating the profit that you're selling the business on, right? So address customer lawsuits immediately and solve those issues today. Now, employee terminations are another very common area that can undermine the value of your business. So say, for example, a current employee is suing you for unpaid wages or, some form of sexual harassment. All of these issues communicate that the business probably has a very poor morale amongst its employees and that there's probably poor management in the company today. And again, when I'm a buyer and I'm thinking through this, yes, that's upside for a very good experienced investor that can turn the business around. But for most buyers, they see that as a transition risk. Those are employee unrest and issues that I don't want to step into right now. You have to fix those issues before you sell. And that's really what happens. And then the last thing that I usually see is environmental concerns. So if you do have environmental lawsuits, whether it's on your property or what you should be doing when you're thinking about selling is looking at the properties around you, your neighbors. Are there any lawsuits in the area? And you can get your corporate lawyer to kind of do a quick search, ask around. But if, say, for example, the next door neighbor has an environmental lawsuit, with their lender or their mortgage provider, whatever the instance is, well, a buyer's going to find that out and they're going to start questioning, well, hold on, how much of your property has been contaminated by their issue? So, ultimately, a lot of buyers are going to ask for a full environmental guarantee, which is usually an indemnity, a rep or an indemnity. And so that's great to sign, but especially if there are actually active environmental issues, don't sign that rep and warranty because any issue that will arise from that, they'll come after you because you've signed that indemnity. So the best thing to do is control your own destiny. Make the investment to clean up the property today so that it's not in someone else's hands who's going to not really care about the cost because you're going to cover the cost for them. So, I'll give you a really good example. We were trying to sell a business, a chemical manufacturing business that had some environmental issues on the property. Okay. And so, ultimately they wanted to go to market. We told them not to, but okay, we went to market. And so in the market, a lot of buyers were looking at that environmental contamination and saying, it's going to cost me $1 million to fix. And so we were valuing the business at $9 million and they would deduct $1 million off it. So the most that we'd ever receive is $8 million for the business. Obviously, the seller wanted 9. And so what we said is, listen, we're not going to get 9. You see that the market's this way. Let's take it off the market and let's go and incur the cost ourselves. So we took the business off the market. The seller goes to seek remediation services, and the cost of the remediation services are $150,000. They clean it up for $150,000. They take it to market and they get over $9 million for the business. So, buyers are going to assume the worst cost estimate, whereas in the seller, you can control your costs and you can control the cost of that remediation. So you address the environmental concern, not the buyer. Okay. So employee planning. Now, the more an owner is able to delegate their day-to-day activities, the more valuable the business is to the investor. So as I said before, the key to focus on when you're trying to pre-plan and sell your business is to focus on how can you build processes and reduce transition risk for a potential buyer. Ultimately, if you're fully out of the business and you're not even critical to generating the profit that the company generates, that's utopia. That's the best case scenario, because then you're not needed. And if an investor buys this business, they're not needed. They can just buy this business for the cash flow it generates, and they don't have to worry about transitioning anything because what they're buying is sustainable. And so a lot of people will pay more for that than, say, for example, you're critical to the business and they need to step into your shoes and learn your job and transition that company. So, realistically, employee planning and delegating all these things, it's not going to take a year. At the very least, it would be about 2 years, even 3, maybe even 5. So what you want to focus on early on is you want to make sure that you're building a management team around you. The worst thing that I see is I'll go into a prospect meeting and I'll say, okay, who is your management team? And they'll come back and they'll say, well, my wife is my CFO and my son is my production manager and I'm the owner. Okay, well, are they staying? Well, no, we want to sell and we're all going to leave, right? Exit the family business. Okay, so you have no management team that's staying on. Yes. Okay, well, I mean, the transition risk is terrible in that scenario, right? Because all the key functions within the organization have been given to family members who are probably not going to be incentivized and not interested in staying on under new ownership. So what you want to do is you want to promote and hire middle management employees, not family members. And so organizations where employees and divisions report directly to the owner create significant buyer risk. If you can promote a veteran employee, a veteran production person, a veteran sales rep to sales manager to production manager, now there's that middle management. They've been around. There's a lot of institutional knowledge. You'll give them a little bit of a promotion in terms of salary, maybe some benefits, and company car, whatever the case is. And what's that's going to cost you? Another $10,000, $15,000. But now you have two managers, hypothetically in this scenario, it could be 3, it could be 1, whatever the case is. But you now have a middle manager that's going to stay on in the business post you leaving the business, and that provides comfort to the buyer. So one of the easiest ways to do that is a year before you sell, identify those staff and move them up to that next level. And so you'll be surprised. Those people may have a lot of initiative that they've been holding back on because they haven't been in a management role. And now you put them into that management role. And so by doing that, you're reducing the transition risk. Now, the other thing is delegation, number 2 here. So focus on delegating responsibilities that are non-owner critical. Payroll, invoicing, inventory purchasing, inside sales, processing and responsibilities. All of these things, an owner should not be holding on to those responsibilities. The reality is an owner, is really focused on growth, on key customer relationship, on strategic, like thinking in terms of how to grow the business, to acquire companies, maybe kind of any financial management and bank reviews and loan management and all that, but processing invoices for customers, buying and just reordering basic things that can be handled by an ERP and an employee, those are responsibilities that can be easily delegated. And the funny part is, all of these things that we're talking about, a buyer is going to do once they take over. They're going to look at that and say, boom, that can be delegated. Boom, I'll hire an employee. And they're realizing the value that you can easily realize yourself before you sell. So why not do it? Take that chance. And especially if you have a few years runway, you can kind of, probe and identify key employees. And if it doesn't work out, okay, push them down or find someone else to come into that role and try to, really play and build a team and start delegating these responsibilities to. And the last thing is key employee retention. So most organizations have one or maybe several key employees that lead critical functions in the business. That could be a VP of production, a purchaser that has key supplier relationships, a sales rep that manages some of your key accounts. You want to make sure that you focus on setting up a bonus plan for this employee, rewarding them for future profit growth. So that may be a profit sharing plan. It may be just a simple bonus plan relative to their sales target. Whatever the case is, you want to make sure and ensure that the employee is not paid below market wages. So one of the things, the reality is when a company sells to a new buyer, a lot of those key employees are going to look around and think to themselves, this is the perfect time for me to leave. I can either go to a competitor, I can maybe even go and start a business like this on my own and do this myself. Frank or John Doe has left, and I loved working with him or her, but now I want to do this on my own. So to mitigate that and to avoid that potential transition risk, if you pay them at market or above market and give them some upside, give them some profit share, they're less likely to leave throughout that transition. And again, the funny part is most buyers will do that anyways. They'll step into the business and they'll say, hey, I don't know anything about this company. They'll go to these key employees and say, I see that you guys are critical to this company. I want to reward you for that. Here's a profit share. Here's these bonus plans, blah, blah, blah. So do that in advance and do the work for the buyer so that the business looks more attractive when you ultimately sell it to that buyer. Now, employee agreements are more relevant for organizations that are dealing with intellectual property. So if you're a contractor or, like a plumber, it's not going to be as critical as if you are a manufacturing business with a unique design, or you're a software business, or you're a teaching and training company with software solutions that you've designed in-house. So if a business in your business has any sort of intellectual property like product design, software, manufacturing processes, in most instances for most small businesses, they don't go through the ordeal of patenting that process because it's expensive, it's costly, and in most instances the legal process is just futile. It's not worth it, right? It doesn't really offer the protection that you would think a patent offers you. So a lot of these businesses that have these key IP things are actually not protected by patents. So what you have to do as the owners a few years before, and hopefully several years before you sell, you want to make sure that you design a plan to effectively transition that IP with that sale without key employees leaving and taking that IP or doing it themselves. And there are several ways you can do that. The first is non-compete agreements. This is really relevant for key staff, key managers. If you're going to hire a VP of production, a sales manager, whatever the case is, you want to have a non-compete agreement that ensures that these employees do not leave the company post-sale and take those key customers or suppliers that have very clear attributable value to the value of the business and move it away from the company. Because in that instance, if those key employees leave, that buyer is going to sue you for the situation that happened, and obviously it's going to be a lot of time wasted and money wasted and lawyers and all that kind of stuff. So to reduce that buyer risk, what you can do is, as you're bringing and onboarding new employees and new middle management, as in the earlier slide we were talking about delegating and building a team, as you're building that team, you should draft a non-compete agreement that they can sign for 1 or 2 years that limits them from operating within your marketplace or going to key competitors and taking your customers. The same is relevant for non-disclosure agreements. So for key staff and designers and programmers that are working directly on the product that's being manufactured or offered, you want to make sure that as part of their employee booklet, they sign a non-disclosure agreement, which limits them from sharing this information outside of the organization with potential other employers. And again, these are just common agreements that in most instances, if you have a few years to prepare, these agreements are not going to be difficult for employees to sign. But obviously, the day before closing, if you're going to go to employees and say, hey guys, I just need you to sign this document. Okay, I'll look it over. No, I need you to sign it right now. They're going to kind of start thinking, why does this guy need me to sign this right now? And so we've had certain instances where we had a seller, give you a good example, we had a manufacturing seller that had key designers that knew a lot about this IP, and he tried to go in and try to get these guys to sign a comprehensive non-compete, non-disclosure agreement. And some of the staff kind of connected one and one together and said, oh, this guy's trying to sell the business. And it just really caused a lot of heartache. Ultimately, they did sign, but it was just a ton of stress, unnecessary stress, and a month delay just to get all these agreements in. So it's better that you do this up front a few years in advance. So as well, for employee contracts, employers must have clauses in place that clarify that any invention is patentable, that is done on the job or used through the resources of that company that the employee invents is the property of the employer. And this is a fairly standard clause in employment agreements, but I'm surprised sometimes when I'm talking to potential owners and sellers that, because they've had such dated job booklets and employee agreements from the 80s, that they haven't really updated their employment agreements to reflect these patent and IP clauses that allow and entitle the employer to own their process or their ideas. So it's really important to have that. And especially, say for example, you hire temp staff or contractors. The last point here is from the contractor's perspective, it is critical that these contractors sign non-competes and copyright protection clauses as well. Because if they come in there, they're not an employee, so they're not under the employment law, and they don't really have the employment contracts that you would put in front of employees. And obviously, from the contractor's point of view, they will naturally work with multiple people in your space. So you need to be absolutely critical that any contract that you bring in, they also have non-compete and copyright protection clauses in place to protect your IP. So there's a lot of legalese documents here. The long and short of it is that from a buyer's point of view, if I'm going to go in there and I'm doing due diligence, one of the first things that I'm going to be asking, especially if you have a very unique process in an industry that is maybe competitive in the market, I'm going to ask, okay, well, how protected is this process? Well, we don't have a patent on it. Okay, that's fine. You don't have a patent on it, but, have staff left in the past? Yeah, if you have left in the last 5 years. And have they ever signed non-competes, non-disclosure agreements, or any kind of protection copyright clauses? Oh, no, they haven't. Okay, well then it's safe to assume that some of these staff may have gone to other competitors and applied those same processes. So it may not be as unique as it was initially explained to me, and therefore I may not want to pay as much for that business. So this is, again, something to protect the value driver of IP, because some businesses are entirely reliant on IP as the core value of their business. Now, in terms of customer and supplier relationships, the nature and structure of the customer or supplier is the primary driver of the business valuation. And so what do I mean by that? Well, there are 3 things that you should focus on in terms of changing the nature of that relationship, primarily with your customers, because they're the key driver of your profitability. The first is on focusing on developing recurring revenues with those customers. So a lot of investors hesitate when they see one-time large project revenues or non-repeat work where the top 10 customers change every single year, year over year. What they really love is steadiness and recurring revenues, because again, it reduces the transition risk, and and you can depend on the fact that those revenues are going to be there next year if I'm going to buy them today. So that reduces the transition risk and increases the value of your business. And this is one of the best ways to increase the value of your business. If you can somehow restructure your service offering or get them to sign a contract for your service offering, all of a sudden it's contracted and it's repeatable, and the value of that same dollar increases exponentially relative to that value of a dollar being on a project-based work that's not going to come back next year. So I'll give you a good example. So if you're selling one-off large pieces of equipment, you want to make sure that at least you have maybe some service agreements in place, maintenance agreements, gas or ink supply agreements, whatever the case is, to complement the large one-off sale with something that's a little bit more recurring. So, give you a live example that we have right now is, we're selling a manufacturing OEM that manufactures specialized equipment. And so, yes, a big portion of their business, 70% of their revenues, comes from new equipment sales, which are one-off, right? Once the customer buys that piece of equipment, they're not going to buy another one. They bought what they needed, right? So, but the reality is that person or that company, they've also sold them on the value of selling parts, supply, and services on a monthly fee. So you pay $200 a month for every single piece of equipment that I've sold to you, and I will fully cover all the service, site visits, any calls, 24/7 calls that you need to maintain that piece of equipment. And so the ongoing value of that customer is not only the one-time sale of the equipment, but also then the ongoing $200 a month in service fees that I get from that customer. And so investors love that. They love to see that repeat nature to the business. The other one is customer diversification. If your largest customer accounts for, say, for example, more than 40% of your revenues, buyers are going to look at that and say, if that customer leaves, the value of this business changes fundamentally. And most likely it's worth much less than it was when I bought it. So, a lot of buyers are either going to pay you less for a very high customer concentration risk if one customer or two customers make up like 60% of your revenues, or they're going to offer you less cash up front in the deal. Right? So maybe a buyer's going to say, sure, I'll pay you $2 million, but I'll only pay you $1 million today, and I'll pay you the remaining $1 million over 3 years just to make sure that these key customers stay with me throughout the transition. So what you want to do, especially if you have one big single customer, is you want to reduce the exposure of that customer. Not obviously reduce the value of that customer, but you want to add other customers or other lines of work or other revenues so that, the value of that customer relative to the total revenues of the business doesn't look as big. Right? So a good example, we're selling a printing company where their largest customer is 60% of their business. One customer makes up 60% of their business, and it's very difficult to sell. It's been a tough challenge, and we were able to find a strategic buyer that was comfortable in taking that risk, but it took a long time to find that buyer because a lot of the smaller investors couldn't justify taking the risk of buying essentially a business that generated majority of its profit off one customer. So it's important to reduce your customer concentration risk if you have it, so that buyers don't have that potential risk on top of their mind, which would limit them from giving you more money for your business. And then the last thing is supplier flexibility. So if the company is heavily reliant on maybe favorable pricing, terms, accessibility to a key supplier, you want to make sure and demonstrate to potential buyers that no. Even though that supplier may change that agreement, I have other options that I can go to continue to take advantage of that same pricing or margin on the work that I'm doing today. So this is usually really important or relevant for commodity-based businesses. If a commodity company is ordering grain from one of their key suppliers and they get a good steady supply with really good pricing, you want to demonstrate that I can go into the open market and find another supplier to deliver that same cost and agreement to me. Because from the buyer's point of view, very similar to a key customer, if there's a key supplier that you're heavily dependent on, they're going to want to make sure that that supplier sticks around and stays on. And either you need to sign a supplier agreement or contract, which guarantees the relationship for at least a few years, or if there is no contract with the supplier, then you want to make sure that you demonstrate flexibility in terms of being able to replace that supplier if they just choose to decide to leave the relationship once the business sells. Okay, so let's talk about the real estate that a business owner may potentially own and how that relates to selling your business. So I'll just start off by saying most financial investors do not want to buy your real estate. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them to. Most investors look at it based on an internal rate of return perspective, and buying real estate requires a lot of cash, requires taking out a very large mortgage. And it's a completely different business outside of buying the business and running the business. So most investors don't care for the real estate. Strategic companies, if you're selling to another printing company or another packaging business, they may buy the real estate, but most financial investors will not. So it's important to separate the real estate from the operating company. And that is point number one here. I think one of the very common things that I'll see with very small business owners is they had cash on the balance sheet of the operating company and ultimately bought the real estate, and it sits in the operating company. And it just causes a ton of issues. Obviously, one is, you need to separate the liability, right? So if someone slips and cracks their head open on the property, well, they're going to sue the landlord or the owner of the property. And if that owner is the operating company, now you have an active lawsuit that's being faced by the business, not the real estate company, which would own the real estate separately. So it's better just to separate the two. And then as well, from a tax perspective, you can efficiently reduce your tax bill at the operating company level if you have the real estate in a separate realco, because what you're doing is you're paying rent to yourself. So in this scenario, if I'm generating $1 million in profit, I can now charge more in rent and reduce that $1 million in profit to maybe 800,000 or 700,000 in profit. So that saves tax on this side of the company. And now I move it into here, that $300,000. And because it's obviously only $300,000 in revenues, I have other costs. Maybe I'll charge a management fee. Maybe I'll depreciate the value of the property. And so really the net profit here is going to be much less than the $300 that I collected in revenues from the rental side. So, in aggregate, I'm actually saving more if I separate the two, if I separate the business and then the real estate. So that's really important. And that's the very first thing that you should do. And this is just a small chart to show you how it's usually done. A business owner or maybe a trust will own the operating company shares directly, and they will separately own directly the real estate company. And then these two are separate, but there's money flowing from the operating company to the real estate company to pay for the property, maintenance, insurance, property taxes, and ultimately you own both entities and you're reducing your tax bill because you're spreading out the money across two entities rather than centralizing it into one. Now, number two, you want to charge yourself market rent. A very, very common mistake I see with business owners is they don't charge themselves enough between the real estate company and the operating company. So as I mentioned, to reduce your tax bill, you want to charge yourself more. And as well, you also want to charge yourself something that's reflective of the market. So most business owners, to show a lot of profit here, and usually the bank is going to look at the operating company, to show a lot of profit here, they only charge themselves, maybe 50% of what the actual true market cost of that property is. But when you go to sell that business, investors look to normalize that. They will say, I don't really care what you charge yourself. I care about what you're going to charge me. And if you, the landlord now, because I'm only interested in buying the business, if you're going to charge me market rent, well, then all of a sudden the rent, the historical cost of that rent doubles or increases by whatever X percentage. So, they're going to normalize your EBITDA either way. So why not charge yourself market rent now so that you're moving your money off the operating company balance sheet up into the real estate company? It reduces your taxes, and as well, it avoids the dispute or the discussion around normalizing your market rent when a buyer is going to be looking to analyze your EBITDA, your earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation. And then the last thing is, when you're going to sell your business, a lot of buyers are going to want to make sure that there's no dispute around the environmental quality of the property. So it's really helpful to invest the time and the resources into getting a phase one environmental report. And what that is it essentially confirms, at a preliminary level that the property and the surroundings and the buildings are not environmentally contaminated. There's no oil leaks, no sources of potential contamination. Because from the buyer's point of view, when they buy the operating company, they want to make sure that all historical issues, all historical environmental concerns are not relevant to them. Because up to the day of me buying this business, all of that is your fault. All of that is your concern. And obviously, if there is concern around environmental contamination, there's a huge dispute around, did you cause it or did I cause it? So getting an environmental phase one done on closing is really effective because it provides a benchmark. Essentially, it draws the line in the sand and saying, up to the day of closing, and here's a report confirming it, there has been no contamination. So now 5 years down the line, if there is a contamination issue, the buyer has no option. They have to admit, it was under my watch that this environmental contamination happened because we had the report that confirmed when I first bought this business, there was no issue on the property. So it's a really effective way to protect yourself as a seller when it comes to environmental disputes. And obviously from the buyer's point of view, it provides a clear line in the sand for them as well. So in most instances, both the buyer and the seller want to get that phase one done. And in some instances, we've even negotiated in the letter of intent, the LOI, that the buyer pays for 50% of the cost of the phase one because, hey, you're benefiting from this as well because you're drawing the line in the sand as well. And you can now point to this and use this same report as I would as the landlord. So this is a really important report to get done from the seller and the buyer's perspective. Okay. So now say, for example, you are leasing the property. Well, there are two considerations when leasing the property. The first is you need to get the landlord consent, right? In the real estate agreement, in the rental agreement, there's going to be a clause that says any change in control of the business will require consent. So the very first thing that I always ask when I'm talking to a prospect and we're talking about this topic is, what does your relationship look like with your landlord? If you're in a dispute with your landlord, and maybe it's an estranged wife or family member that doesn't like you and can cause some drama, well, hold on a second. They may be able to withhold that consent, and obviously they're going to say not to be withheld without reasonable issue. But it's just going to delay the ultimate sale and cause more drama and more wasted expense around lawyers. It may even potentially scare off buyers. So the very first thing is, if you're leasing the property, make sure that you check off the box saying, yeah, I'm okay with my landlord. I don't really expect them to have any issue around landlord consent. Because if you don't, then you need to start working on that, or maybe even move the property so that you're not subject to this potential limitation here. And then the more important issue is around lease extensions. So when you're selling a business, and especially if you're selling a business that's going to see its lease expire in the next 12 months, it creates a lot of buyer risk, because from the buyer's point of view, he or she's going to need to renegotiate a lease extension, which is going to change the cost of that real estate. And usually nowadays, in the current marketplace that we're in, real estate costs are going up. There's a lot of inflation in the real estate market, and so lease rates are increasing. So for a lot of buyers, when they see a potential lease extension renewal that will come up in the next 12 months or 24 months, it creates a lot of concern around, hey, what the true EBITDA of this business is, because the moment I renew this lease, it's probably going to go up, and all of a sudden my net profit relative to what I'm buying today is going to go down. So they're going to pay less for your business if your lease is expiring within the next 12 to 24 months. So the best thing to do is very similar to any other issue, whether it's a dispute, environmental concern, handle it yourself up front. Go get the lease extension done, or at least get some certainty around the expected cost of that lease in terms of communication from the landlord, so that when you're talking to buyers, you can, and they start talking about, oh, well, we're going to have to re-sign a lease extension in the next 12 months. Like, and real estate markets are going up by 60% this year and blah, blah, blah. You remove that, ammunition from their negotiation by saying, no, I've already started negotiations. Here's a landlord's communication on where they expect the lease rate to be renewed at. And so that way you have some form of proof or some form of guidance for that. Now, say, for example, the business is currently in a below market lease. The best thing to do is to take advantage of actually this favorable lease 3 to 4 years in advance. So if you have a favorable lease, it's like 60% below market. And I've seen a few businesses like that, where they just, the landlord doesn't care and negotiated a bad deal for them. And so, the business has a really good lease in place, and now the market has gone crazy and their lease, when it comes due, is going to jump significantly. What you want to do is you want to strike while the iron's hot and take advantage of that by selling the business 3 to 4 years before the lease renewal. Gives the buyer enough time for them to take over the business, pay down some debt, and benefit from that lease. But it's not too soon that the buyer is going to start asking, hey, I'm going to have to renegotiate this lease in 12 months' time, and therefore I want a price reduction in expectation of that lease expense increasing. So if you have a favorable market lease, the best time to sell the business is probably 3 or 4 years before that lease term comes up. Okay? So the last area is outstanding cash and loans on the balance sheet. So a lot of businesses are closed and sold on a cash-free, debt-free basis. What that means is that I'm selling you the assets of the business, but the debt is going to be paid out using the cash I have today, and any excess cash I'm going to hold on to. And the reason why is most buyers don't want to buy excess cash. It's inefficient to, right? If I'm paying $5 million for a business, but $1 million of that is in cash, I'm going to pay tax on the full $5 million. So I'm literally using cash to buy cash and paying tax on that acquisition. Like, I don't want to do that. I'd just rather pay $4 million for the asset value of the business, and you keep the cash, and I'll just put $1 million of my own cash in the business, right? So that's why most businesses are sold on a cash-free, debt-free basis. And so when you're doing that, you want to make sure that a few years in advance, you're managing your cash balance and you're starting to move that cash off the balance sheet, especially if you want to sell the business in a share sale, which is the most tax efficient for you as the seller. So to make the transition easy, if you have excess cash on the balance sheet, Number one, you want to work with an advisor to tax efficiently move this cash off your balance sheet prior to sale. And you can do that through pension plan, pension plan structures. There in Canada, there's an IPP plan which allows you to essentially contribute cash from the company balance sheet into your own personal retirement plan. There's certain dividend elections and tax and estate freezes that you can move cash into a trust. Whatever the case is, take a year or two before sale and set that up so that you can move that cash today. Don't let the cash sit till the day of close because there are certain issues. You may miss out on certain tax exemptions or tax benefit programs, and as well, it's just a hassle that you don't want to address right now. So if you have a ton of cash, and I'm thinking about, say for example, your business is worth $5 million and you have $3 million worth of cash, you don't need that $3 million on the balance sheet of the operating company. Start moving it up today. And in Canada, where I saw businesses, a lot of instances, if the value of the cash is greater than 50%, 50 or more percent of the business's value, then there's also capital gains exemption risk. You may actually put at risk the value of your capital gains exemption because the Canadian government may look at this and say, no, it's not really an operating company. This is a holding company with some operating company assets. So you want to make sure that, from the IRS or CRA perspective, you're seen as an operating company with a business and that you're not seen as a holding company that just holds a lot of cash. So we went through a recent example where we were selling a business that, was about $4 million in value and they had $6 million in cash on the balance sheet. And the exemption did not allow them to take advantage of the capital gains exemption, and so the vendor probably lost out on, give or take, $400,000 or $500,000 in tax savings because they weren't able to properly manage the status of their company and start moving that cash in earlier years off the balance sheet. As well, when you're looking to take on or renew existing credit facilities, you always want to make sure, especially if you're thinking about selling in the next 1 or 2 years, look at those prepayment penalties for that loan. Buyers will not assume your debt. They will not pay it out for you. You have to pay off your own debt. Again, in that cash-free, debt-free basis. When you're selling the company, you're taking your cash to pay off your debt and dividending out any excess cash. So say, for example, you just took on a term loan 2 years before you were selling and you knew you were going to sell. Well, and that term loan had prepayment penalties of 9 months of interest. You're responsible for that full 9 months of interest penalty yourself as a seller. So it's always beneficial, especially if you don't need to take out debt, don't take out debt a year before selling. And if you have to take out debt, either take out debt with a floating rate loan where the prepayment penalties are lower, or negotiate a loan with the bank where the prepayment penalties are either eliminated or very low to reduce the fees that you have to pay. It's unbelievably, a lot of clients are surprised when they're going to actually clean up their balance sheet right before selling, and they have to go to the bank and ask for a payout letter. And with that payout letter, the bank is asking them for $150,000 in fees. And all of a sudden, the seller is like, "Whoa! That $5 million offer, when I net out all these fees, is actually not $5 million because they have to pay back this debt." So don't get surprised. Manage your debt obligations before closing. And one of the last things is if your business has paid upfront deposits or gift cards for future services. So say, for example, your business sells gift cards because you're a mini putt facility. It's important to keep track of the gift cards themselves. You should have a gift card management program or a deposit program in place. And you also want to keep track of the costs incurred up to that point to sell those gift cards or to incur those deposits. And the reason why I say this is one of the very common areas of dispute is deferred revenue and deposits. A lot of buyers will say, hey, I'm entitled to fully assuming 100% of those deposits on the balance sheet because you haven't delivered the services as the seller yet. So that money is mine because when I'm going to have to deliver those services when I take over this business tomorrow and start running it. Now, me being on the broker and the advisor side for the seller, I always push back to the buyer and say, well, hold on a second, that's not true. A portion of those gift cards are ours as a seller because that seller has incurred some form of cost to sell that gift card, to deliver that service, to convince that customer to buy that gift card or to make that deposit, whether it's marketing, some form of sales cost already. So what you want to do is you always want to keep track of your costs when it comes to on deferred revenue and deposit projects. How much cost have I incurred with that customer or project up to the point of the sale? And if you can keep that information handy, it reduces the potential negotiation risk for you when buyers going to come and ask for 100% of your deposits. So that's, another thing to keep in track of. So in summary, there's a ton, I'm just going on here. I'm looking, I think this is a full hour video, but there's a ton of things that you can do to increase the value of your business. And it's an ongoing multi-year process, and it takes a ton of time and, a little bit of money, but a lot more time, because you as the owner are the best person to implement that change. You can't delegate this to someone else. You're going to need to make those accounting changes. You're going to need to stay accountable and encourage people to adopt your processes that you want to see. And so accountability is a very important part of making these changes effectively to obviously impact the value of your business. And so one of the best things that I recommend doing is finding some external partners to help you with that. I think an accountant is not a good option. The reason why is an accountant has their other clients to manage, and they're not in the business of consulting. And obviously, if they know that you want to sell, they may not even be interested in helping you out because they're going to lose your business, because usually buyers move the accounting business to their accountant when they buy a company. So they know that the term of your relationship is going to end soon. So you want to find a few external partners to work with. The first one that I would recommend is commercial bankers. A lot of experienced commercial bankers have had clients in the past that have sold, and they in general are familiar with your account, especially if you've been banking with this one bank for 20 years. You have a lot of files things on file. They've come and seen you. You've had lunch with them over the years, so they know your business. They know what about M&A. They know about these kind of sell side buy side processes. So they're a really good free resource just to either pick up the phone or take out to lunch and say, hey, listen, I want to sell my business soon. Where should I be focusing on, just based on, my business? What are areas of the business that, buyers aren't going to like? What things should I change? Where should I focus my resources on? And in addition, usually if you have a wealth management relationship with that same bank, and a lot of these big banks, they now have a succession wealth planning advisory group. It's essentially a cost center. There's no fee with it. It's a complimentary service to you as a banking client that, a former M&A consultant or advisor is going to come in there, and from a succession planning perspective, they're going to help you prepare your business either way. So instead of listening to this darn video, you can just pick up your commercial banker, call him and say, hey, do you have a wealth management or succession planner that I can speak with? Yeah, sure, here. And those services usually they either cost nothing or they cost very little, because the bank is not interested in charging you fees for those succession advisory services. They care about your wealth management business, because once you sell, you're going to be sitting on $5 million worth of cash, and they want you obviously to stay with the bank so that they can manage your money. And that's the more profitable relationship for them. So that's why these throwaway services are actually pretty valuable to you, and they cost you nothing. So take advantage of them. The other one is business brokers. So one of the best exercises to do, and I always recommend this, even though I am one and I kind of know the game, we don't cost a lot when you're talking to us up front, right? We may have a small retainer, a small hourly fee for some consulting services, but in most instances, business brokers get paid when the business sells. So a few years in advance, what you should be doing is already interviewing and speaking with some of the brokers that sell your type of business, your size and your industry, and that would be ideal for you to work with, and get them to tour your business and get their initial take and feedback. How much am I worth? What do you think my valuation is? How can I increase my valuation just based on what you're seeing? And get their feedback. It costs you nothing, because they're going to be trying to sell you on their knowledge and what they can offer to you. So take advantage of that. Speak to those brokers and get a few of them in your business so that they can walk the facility and lend some advice in terms of where they would see buyers really interested in improving your business. And the last thing is, if you really want to pay someone, a good paid solution is hiring a succession consultant, planning or succession consultant. And these are consultants that will come in. They either were former business brokers or commercial bankers or wealth managers, and they will come in and look at your entire structure. And they will almost sit on a board, a hypothetical board, where on a quarterly or a monthly basis, they will walk through your business and they'll talk to you and say, hey, how are you doing? How are blah, 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 whatever the case is in terms of the change that you want to implement. And they will become that dedicated accountability partner. So I'd say for the first two, these are really good idea generating conversations to have. But these, commercial banker or business broker, they're not going to be there every month to keep you accountable, to keep you on track. Whereas a paid solution is. That's why they're there. That's why you're paying them, so that they can keep you on track in terms of goals and what you need to focus on. So maybe a really good solution if, for example, you have a ton of change that you want to implement and you don't know where to start. So these are some of the areas where you can start. And obviously for me, like I'm in the M&A advisory space. So if you want to reach out to me, then please either go to my website at Rob Lee Capital or reach out over LinkedIn, and I can happily have that, high level discussion to give you my take on, your business or whatever the case is. So that's it for this video. If you found the video helpful, please do like and subscribe to the channel. And obviously, if you have any questions, then you can also comment below in the video and I will be able to respond there. Or you can reach out or go on my website and reach out to Rob Lee Capital, and we can talk, separately or privately based on your transaction situation. But if you found the video, please share it with your other business owner friends or with your other clients, and we'll have a great day. Thank you. Bye.